So in this video, I'm going to tell you why Sony cameras are 100 times better than Nikon cameras, specifically for video. Stay tuned. So if you have a Nikon camera and you're thinking about upgrading to a Sony, my recommendation is if you're specifically for video, yes, I know in my last video I said that Nikon cameras are better for video, but if you're talking about the long term and price and just overall future proofing your own footage, Sony, even a Sony Alpha series, 65, 63, and even 6000 series is better than any Nikon line specifically for even the 3000 and 5000 series. Because not only, yes, you are paying a bit more, $500 to $600 more, but one of the things, if you're specifically for video and you've used Nikon in the past, one of the things I really appreciate about Sony is their autofocus system. You will be able to, for the first time, be able to have your camera set on AFC. In other words, autofocus continuous, without having to worry about, pulling focus, without having to worry, oh, am I gonna actually focus or not? Because Sony's cameras, although aren't perfect when it comes to continuous autofocus, the autofocus does a pretty damn well job, specifically even if you have things like face detection on and you're constantly moving. Whereas if you have a Nikon camera, one of the things that I really dislike about Nikon videos is that they don't have in-camera good focusing system. In other words, if I'm here, since I'm on AFS right now, and let's hypothetically pretend I put my camera on AFC, it's gonna constantly have to hunt. And Nikon is notorious for having this pulsating hunting type of autofocus, which is good for photos, but it is not ideal for video. Hence, if you're a Nikon videographer, the few of us that are out there, you have to rely on things like manual focus or AFS and focusing ones, then figuring out whether or not you want to see that you're in focus or not. Whereas if you use Sony camera, you don't have to worry about that. Maybe a half press there, because Sony, its autofocus system does mess up once in a while and it doesn't have it. You will have things like focus peaking to see whether or not what you're focusing on is on the right plane. Whereas on a Nikon camera, you can't really do that. Yes, you can zoom in a little bit, but Sony cameras, you can have much better autofocus. And once you're used to the things like video and autofocus, you don't want to go back to something along the lines of a Nikon camera for video, specifically for autofocus. I'd say reason number 2 of why Sony cameras are better than Nikon cameras is that Sonys are known to have better high dynamic range, because as you can see in the background, it is heavily overexposed and my whites are getting pretty much crushed. And you can't really see the detail in the background at all, and my face is underexposed. In other words, if I wanted to bump up the ISO, my face can be properly lit, but the background is overexposed. Hence, Nikon, especially the crop sensor series, doesn't have the best high dynamic range, but it does its job. But you can use things like ND filters and all that. Sony is known to deal with having high dynamic range and deal with it a lot better than Nikon cameras. Well, Nikon cameras are much more suited towards having the same kind of condition. Yes, I'm talking about photos is one thing, but video specifically, as you can see here as a prime example. And my very last reason of why Sony cameras are just better in general and made for video is that you can film in S-Log3, S-Log2, and have different types of picture profiles. Whereas this Nikon camera, yes, you do have flat, neutral, vivid profiles, but if a camera has things like S-Log and Cine 3, Cine 4, those cameras are made specifically for video. And then on top of that, Sony lets you have the ability to film in 4K. Whereas Nikon, specifically even in the D7000 line, the 5000 and the 3000 line, you can't film videos in 4K. And as time progresses, more things are going to be 4K and the higher quality, and you can't get away with things like 720p anymore. So overall, this video isn't to bash my lovely D5600, which always has a fond place in my heart. But if you are considering purchasing a Nikon camera, or do you want to get a Sony camera, do videos, and you play around with photos but you don't really do photos, but you want to do videos more, then I would highly recommend you pick up a Sony camera, because Sonys are known more for video and you have better capabilities like 4K, and then things like internal IBIS, internal body image stabilization, whereas Nikons, you only have lens stabilization, but there's no in-body stabilization, and there's much more features on a Sony specifically made for video than Nikon's made for photos. But just like my entire channel is based on, you should never let your gear compromise what you want to do. If you have a Nikon camera and you want to film videos, go ahead, film videos. If you have a Sony camera and you want to do videos, go do videos. But if you had the budget and you had to pick one over the other, and you want to have good quality videos, and you want to be a beast when it comes to videography and not have any things like limit you, like focus peaking, you want to have like in-body leveler, you want to have film in 4K, the Sony is the way to go. And eventually, I myself am going to eventually switch into Sony. But don't get me wrong, Nikon is not a bad place to start. But check out my other video, I'll leave in the link below or in the description, of why Nikon cameras are better than Sony. But at the end of the day, it's not about the camera that you have. You take a complete noob at videos, doesn't know what they're doing, and you give them a $10,000 camera, and you give someone like me a $200 camera, point and shoot, and we'll see who can go toe to toe. Yes, you might be able to film higher, better video quality, but it's all about putting the reps and using what you have and not using that as a limitation. Yes, quality matters in the end, but it's coupled with things like storytelling, like how your composition, what are you trying to tell? Your own story, your own world, your own vision, and never let equipment be your hindrance to whatever it is you're trying to do. My name is Peter. Those are the reasons why Sonys are better than Nikons, and you're watching Broke Visionary Collective, where we all start with nothing, but you can always create something.